I'm not an educator, so that's let the educators ask the questions.
Did you go into an explanation of how, and I think you alluded, I heard of bits and pieces of this, how applicants select areas of study or areas that they want to teach in, or is it that school systems submit to you, these are the areas that we have a profound need for, and you do the search part? How does that?
So
how does that work?
Yeah, good question. We recruit all majors, and then, well, you can talk about that probably better than I can as far as the recruitment, and then people sort of self-select the areas that they would teach, and then we actually, from a regional standpoint, say how many of which kind of teacher we're looking for. But the idea is we have across the spectrum, K through 12. But go ahead.
Yeah,
talk just about.
Yeah, I mean, it's open to all majors, and essentially the way it works is that the folks that do get accepted into Teach for America, they preference their regions. They preference it. And typically, 95% of them get their first through third choices. Probably 30 regions at this point. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily from that end of how the Delta or how the Alabama school districts would necessarily indicate how many teachers they need and of what sort. I'm not real familiar with those.
Yeah, basically, again, it's from working with districts. So I just put in my target list of what, I'm expected to bring in 105 folks this upcoming year. So I have delineated how many elementary teachers, how many math teachers, how many advanced math, how many chemistry, how many physics, French, down the line. Basically, art, music, we do as well. That I think we're going to need. Again, as I was talking earlier, our districts request so many more than we can possibly do. That's never been a problem. And so, again, each region acts somewhat differently. So I'm only telling you specifically how we operate in the Delta. But basically, in the spring of the year, I'll get together with all my superintendents and say, okay, what's the picture looking at as far as your needs? And it's a continual conversation throughout what we call that placement timeline, which we like to wind up by about the 15th of June, ideally. And in effect, we work with the districts and almost act like a huge HR department for our partnering districts, because we're also looking to see the talent that's being brought and the strengths of the people and the way that we think they will best work in particular schools given the support we know they need. So again, we have a lot of information around what the district needs, looks like. And so, I was saying to Michael, so for instance, one year, Shelby may need 4, and next year they may need 2. That's kind of their cycle. So by working with a number of different districts, and I can balance that out. Basically, the need is still there. I just shift from one district to the next. Because again, we're looking to have continuity on campus over time, because these second years alums bring these first years on board so much quicker than if we're breaking that continuity and having to start from scratch, build up the relationships up and down the classroom hall with all the other veteran teachers. Because again, veteran teachers are, as well as our first and second year, third, fourth, whatever, are key to providing the kind of support that we know. And connecting with families, all these sort of things that we know makes for a very successful.
How did you guys decide to come to a rural area?
I just you get your selection or your choices of how to refer to whatnot. I left it to chance. New York, Delta, LA.
Very similar areas, all of them.
I just alternated, and this is what I got.
And that's my story as well. I had Chicago, Baltimore, I had some other regions up there, but the folks that ultimately get placed in the rural regions are the ones that want a new experience usually. Want to experience a different culture, a different, and this is from someone growing up in New Hampshire, Mississippi Delta, 6 years. It could not be any different. So I've enjoyed it obviously a lot. A lot of folks that do the rural region kind of, I'd say have a little bit different bend on things. Mr. Rhodes.
A lot closer knit community between the teachers themselves.
How is the relationship between the teachers and administrators that are established in the community when Teach for America is brought in?
how does that work out? Because I know that there's cultural and political issues that are there operating.
Go ahead.
How does that work, and what does Teach for America do to make sure that it's not the new group coming in to facilitate change, even though that may be the reality? How does that work as far as professional relationships?
We crush the savior mentality, number one.
Okay.
That's not what we're about. People, one of the things that we select on, one of the threads is respect and humility. And that plays out in a lot of different ways, but obviously, just because you are privileged by a good education doesn't mean you know everything. Just because you may or may not have come from a similar background doesn't mean you know what's going on here and have the best read on it. What you need to do is come in, as my daddy used to say, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth, using that portion. And so, as again, we look at everyone around us as resources. That's a lot.
Just to piggyback off what Ron was saying, the ideas of respect and humility are not keywords that are buzzed around. They're kind of like ideas that are ingrained from the selection process. Like, we look for people who demonstrate that respect and humility. And like from day one of training, like I've trained 2 summers in Institute, like the 6 weeks boot camp kind of that these new teachers go through. And like, you just kind of gotta slap them from day one saying, hey, you're going into a place where you're going to be perceived beyond how you perceive yourself or how you've been used to being perceived, and you've really got to go into it kind of with this openness and this respect and humility.
Just to add one more piece to that, because I actually saw this play out this year with the 3 first-year teachers, Mr. Brown, Ms. Spofford, and Ms. Lucas. I asked them their thoughts on corporal punishment, because that is still a norm in the schools in the Mississippi Delta. And that's something that some Teach for America teachers, at least in my experience in the past, have come in. And so I just, with a little bit of apprehension towards that, they all came in with literally, and this is in separate occasions, they had come from Houston, they had had 6 weeks of training, they had received those same messages, that the way to truly affect change is to actually work within the system and to work within those norms. And they literally all said that same answer. If this community still values this, if this is something that they still think is effective and necessary, then we absolutely will be on board with that. So I literally heard the exact same answer from those 3 in separate conversations, which just goes to show how strong the training and messaging has really been for the folks in Houston when they get trained.
And that's not to say that, particularly on that issue,
Right.
some people, if they choose not to use that, they know it's also, the onus is on them
Right.
to reteach a new and different method.
But there was no political,
No,
there's absolutely no agenda in
Right.
reforming these schools or sharing those sort of views, because it's at the end of the day, that's not even what's most important. They really do come in with the singular focus of increasing student achievement, and that's kind of the mission. I guess if there is any real change that's going to happen, it's going to happen within the classrooms.
Kind of piggyback on what Wayne, Ron, you typically do not send anyone out by themselves, is that correct? In other words, to a particular school assignment,
If
you
we
would
can
have
help
at
it,
least 2?
we don't. There are occasionally, for instance, if there's a very strong school, very supportive school, where perhaps that continuity has somehow been broken by, like we may have had, it's a small school, for instance, and we may have had no placement there last year because they didn't need them, but they had 2 second years and an alum, all of whom then finished their commitment, have gone off. We will start that over again, and it may be they just need 1 this year, but to start that cycle back, we will, in the right occasion, do that. But 97% of our folks are 2 or more on campus here, and that this year.
I think that's what Wayne was, the I think everybody can see the good side of that. The downside would be a tendency to just bond with the other one that came with you.
Yeah.
And this is crazy.
It's interesting. There's, and I think you guys know about